All right, everyone. I'm Davis Hunt, editor-in-chief of the Pamphleteer. I'm here today with Alice Raleigh, who's running for mayor. Also, the Pamphleteer's official endorsement for mayor. We think that Alice is well positioned to take over this city in this crucial time. So we're going to get into that in a second. First, I want to do some basic housekeeping. For those of you that don't know, the Pamphleteer is a daily newsletter that we send out. This past week, we've been doing an election guide, and I'll show you that real fast. Since Monday, we've gone through the vice mayoral race, the Metro Council at large, and broke down the mayor's race into three parts. The third part we released this morning. So if you want to get that stuff in your email, we've got a nice handy sign up form on our website here. We even have membership tiers. If you pay $10 a month, you can get access to the comments section and early access to Pamphleteer events, which many of you might remember back in the early days of the Pamphleteer when we did our happy hours. We're going to start rolling out those, centering more around a guest and less around just drinking and having a good time. So you'll get access to that. Mostly, as most local media outlets these days ask, your donation mostly goes to funding the operation. As I've talked about here before, starting in the 2000s, ad revenue started to leak out of local media and into sites like Google and Facebook. So local media outlets have to find these kind of creative business models, which are kind of a mix of donations and advertisement sponsorships. It's just a panoply of things. So that's all I have to say. I'm going to bring Alice up here, and we're going to talk about her platform. Alice, how are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, well, it's good. It's good to be back. I enjoyed doing your show, I think early on in the campaign over in your office.
That was before we added this high-tech video component.
Yeah, this is I feel very honored and very high tech. Thank you, Davis, and thank you for your endorsement. That is actually, I think, this week the third that we're excited about. The Community Leaders of America are pragmatic and center right mayors governing cities all over the country, like Maddie Parker in Fort Worth and David Holt in Oklahoma City. Their group has endorsed my candidacy here in Nashville, and then also Grover Norquist's group.
Oh,
right. Yeah. So, somebody asked me earlier this week, a reporter from a different publication. He said, "Gosh, Alice, the Community Leaders of America, that's pretty, center right group, and Grover's group is really radical." And I said, "Really? Is it radical to let taxpayers have a seat at the table?" I don't think so. For listeners who know Governor Haslam's Improve Act, that was passed and brought up in terms of sort of helping modernize aspects of the way that we were able to operate our roads and road construction here. And that was taxpayer compliant. They worked with Grover's group, right? Like the idea that you can't step back and say, if I need to raise a certain type of revenue, what are offsetting cuts or offsetting other places that I could look at so that a taxpayer is not, that we're not taking this attitude of just constantly tax and spend. And so if anyone is confused about the Americans for Taxpayer reform, don't be confused. The taxpayer should have a seat at the table in our government, and too frequently they don't.
That's been a consistent theme of your campaign, and it's kind of something that you've have been extremely consistent about and not deviated from. Have you noticed other candidates maybe picking up on that at all? Or
early on in the campaign, I was probably the only candidate talking about our debt and finances. The only one really talking about, though I'll give Jim Gingrich some credit there. I think he's been pretty consistent from the beginning, or maybe we've helped him come along. I think our city's crime issues, we've been pretty consistent talking about. And then schools, one I was cheering internally the other day when another candidate said, we really do need to make sure that all of our first graders can read. And I was just like, this is amazing. So it does mean that you have to stay on your toes. Now I have frequently pivoted to how are we going to pay for it, talking about some different aspects of state law that I think tie our hands a little bit. Some pieces from state history that I think that we could bring back up to move things over, because I am a believer, and no one else has come out with this yet, but maybe before the end of the campaign they will. I do believe that in order to move forward, we have to take the position that we can love Nashville and love Tennessee. And I do believe that. I know that people look at me in this kind of like Ted Lasso kind of a campaign that that they think, oh no, we're so used to electing somebody who looks just like this, who coaches just like this, and that's who our coach has to be. And then there's me over here saying, maybe if we get to a position of recognizing that we have some real structural challenges as a city, right? Like think about people, going through a recovery, right? In a 12-step process. The first step is recognizing you have a problem, right? Until we say, yes, we have more debt in Davidson County than the entire state of Tennessee put together, and we need help. And we've actually got to fix that, and we're not going to do it alone. But the idea that we're running around saying everything's fine here, nothing to see, no problem, right? Our city hall is literally burning, and we're letting it happen. That a couple of years ago we did that, and then we go, it's fine, everything's fine. So I think that that's just a little bit of a different attitude.
What would be the first line of communication or project you'd work with the state on? What's your number one priority in kind of mending that relationship?
Well, I think that the first is restoring a sense of decorum and order to the city, and I think that starts with things as simple as how I will organize my swearing in. Right? For listeners, if you went to the city's State of the City earlier this year, as I did, it was held at a school, and granted, the school isn't open yet; it's a new high school in Bellevue. But it was held at a school in the day. And for some reason, in this work of thinking that City Hall is this like performative backdrop for national social issues, we invited a drag queen to stand on the stage.
Yeah.
And, and I went up to her afterwards and I was like, I've seen you perform at a friend's 50th birthday party down at the Ink building. I've seen you at a Christmas party at a friend's house over in Whitland. You're great, but like, what are you doing here at 10 o'clock in the morning at a city address, like on the stage? And these are the sort of things that I think there's bad behavior on all sides, but it starts with an adult in the room saying, we're going to say the pledge, we're going to say all of the prayers, we're going to give our speech, and then we're going to go home. We don't need to use, just because you can wear a bathing suit to church, you don't.
Yeah.
Right. Like this kind of idea of this constantly adding the adjectives in at every single moment, instead of saying like, hey, my job is to get the kids reading, just all kids reading, all the potholes filled, not certain potholes, all, don't care. And when you call 911, whatever adjectives you use, we're going to come. Like that's our job. And the rest of it really, I think, clouds much of the work of government. I think it frankly makes it difficult to recruit and retain high quality workforce for the city. I think it makes people start to think, is my job to be part of this, political movement, or is my job to take the trash out, right? Is my job to teach the kids? And so I think actually a lot of it is frankly just kind of bringing it down and saying, our mayoral administration is not going to do that. I will mention an endorsement that I didn't get, and I want to mention something that I think is important in already showing the difference in how I approach the work of serving the mayor. So I didn't get a Planned Parenthood endorsement, right? 6 or 7 candidates were endorsed, but I didn't respond. We responded. The questionnaire led with state legislative endorsement. That is what the questionnaire was. And we wrote back and said, we don't think it's appropriate for the mayor of the city in a municipal election who does not set or create state or federal policy with respect to decisions on life. We don't think that it's appropriate to either seek or provide an endorsement in this race. And we never heard back. But frankly, if the National Right to Life sent me their endorsement, I would say the same thing. We are not going to have a pro-life rally or a pro-choice rally. We're going to be really focused on first graders reading and taking out the trash, right? So you might say that that I just think it's a decidedly different attitude. And then secondly, in terms of repairing a relationship with the state, I mean, I already began in a position of having good relationships with members of the state, at the executive, the state level. And I think that when we bring an idea forward, I mean, I think it's probably starting obviously with the first priority around schools. I do think, and we're not alone in aspects of school funding, but it's also saying we've got to be accountable. We see where our scores are. We know that only 20% of our kids are reading or graduating career or college ready, and that's a problem. And I think just pretending that it's not a problem is not useful in a relationship.
Something you said at a recent mayoral forum. I mean, there's 1,000 of them. I can't remember which one it was.
Yeah, there have been a lot, and I have gotten some interesting questions.
Something you brought up at one of them was that we want to be more like Miami-Dade and less like Detroit, and you received some kind of unfair flack for that, in my obvious opinion. But like, could you elaborate on what Miami-Dade does that's so effective, and what separates it from even Nashville or Detroit? Like, what are the
what I was reflecting on there, and thanks for bringing that up. I think the question was, would you ever consider, as I think 3 mayors ago did, taking over or changing to a mayoral appointed school board? And my position is, and I would say probably not unlike Carl Dean, who was the last mayor that anybody said was an education mayor. So if you sort of hold this up as an education mayor who brought this idea forward, is that if the school board will not take accountability for our results and responsibility for our results, someone has to. And as the mayor, if I am charged with levying and managing $3.2 billion from our residents, and $1.2 billion of that goes to schools, the buck has to stop with someone in terms of responsibility for the schools. So the distinction that I was making there is saying, if we look at the history of Detroit operated its schools as if they would always have parents and families captive. And what did we see happen? The families left the city. They started going and settling in the suburban districts around that. We see that happening in Nashville. Families started to leave. And then the sort of forces controlling Detroit schools were brought into a really uncomfortable situation. Once the families and the parents start leaving, and if you have designed your school system believing that they would always be there and believing that they would always be captive to the way that you ran schools and the results that you were getting, the school system had to be bankrupted because it could not support the cost structure that it had built itself on. And I would posit that Nashville probably maybe less dramatically, because Detroit, I think, was about 240,000 students and it dropped down to about 50,000. And then it had to be bankrupted, right? To like totally reorganized, totally separated. And so the lesson there is to say, do you listen to parents? Are you responsive to parents? And right now in Metro Davidson County, we have only a quarter of the families that are admitted to MEGs we seat. And we take this position of, well, just send them back and they'll stay. That's not happening. Instead of taking the position of saying, maybe we should have 2 MEGs. For 20 years in the city, I went to Hume-Fogg High School and I heard it all the time. We can just have 1 MEGs. Well, 8 years ago, Valor came here, and Valor's middle school is now outperforming MEGs, and they don't have an admission criteria of a minimum score. So saying, is it possible to produce results that are as good or better? Can we do that? We've proven our own fallacy wrong. So the case on Miami-Dade, what Miami-Dade did is they said, instead of fighting different types of school models, why don't we claim all children as our children? They didn't charterize the whole district. This isn't Alice screaming from the rooftops, turn every school into a charter school. But they listened to parents and they took what was working in schools and started to emulate that and bring it across. But mostly what Miami has is an attitude that says it's possible. So they started F-rated. And I've had school board member come up to me the other day and say, don't say we're F-rated. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, the state hasn't come up with this score. And we talked about that. I was like, oh, okay. So our strategy is don't say that things aren't going well. Like, that's not a good strategy. But they went from being F-rated to A-rated. So I bring Miami-Dade up to say, there is every excuse is thrown at us as parents and families in Metro. Our school system is too big. Nope, Miami-Dade is bigger. Our school system is really diverse. Miami-Dade is equally diverse, has a few less languages spoken, but structurally it's pretty diverse. Our city is really expensive. Miami-Dade, expensive city, right? We need more money because we can't get a result until we have more money. Miami-Dade spends equivalent cost, actually a little bit less now with this new budget, on dollars per student. So let's take all of those excuses off the table and start to say, now let's get the results. And I wanted, last thing, because I am sort of obsessed with education, which people know, and I can't help myself. But just to say it is possible. Here in Metro Nashville, Warner Arts Elementary in East Nashville was a bottom 5% in the state school, attracted a leader, Ricky Gibbs, who, guess what, grew up in Miami in Liberty City, one of the hardest neighborhoods in Miami. He brought his belief that this is possible, and he's turned that school around, brought families back to it, gotten it on the reward school list, and guess what? He's unfortunately leaving Metro schools right now. Thankfully for us, he's staying in Nashville. He's going to lead public schools, a public charter school network. So he's still going to be serving our kids. He's still going to believe everything's possible. But I don't know this, I haven't talked to Ricky in years, but if you go and listen to, but I do think people vote with their feet. And if you go and listen to the season 2 of The Promise, a podcast, WPLN NPR, you can hear the force. He has to almost be constantly fighting central office to do what's right for kids. And he was so brave in that podcast to even bring it up. And, I'm sure, I don't know again when I left, but you can hear, it's like when I'm doing good things and you are making it harder for me at every turn. And so, like, in spite of them, not because of them, he turned that school around. So when I say we can become Miami-Dade, I mean, we can take every excuse off the table and get results.
Because they offer a counterexample to everything that people have said about the Nashville school system. What role do charters play in that?
In the Miami-Dade example?
In Nashville, in your
so when we think about this question of a fork in the road and sort of bankrupting potentially our school system because of cost structure if families start to leave. So, and when I said here's a marker that you're going to see right now, this current school board is pretty anti-charter, but what will happen? Let's play it out. In the next 2 years, several of our high-performing charter schools are coming up for their 10-year reauthorization, and so tell me you're going to reapprove them, right? They're getting results at incredibly high rates. They've got waiting lists. They've got families coming there. And so go ahead and tell me, okay, Alice, we're going to reapprove them. But it's interesting because there's almost this sense of like, I need to be mad at them constantly. But here's my concern. Right now, what is happening is as certain charter schools are being denied at the local level, they're exiting this school system. Their dollars are exiting the Metro Nashville school system. Their scores are exiting the Metro Nashville school system. And they are going to the state charter school district, right? So if at scale, a lot of these 10-year charters come up, and if they are denied, then they're going to exit and go over here. Then I think you're going to have a situation where you got 25 or 30,000 students educated in the state charter school system operating in Davidson County, and you maybe have 50,000 students educated in MNPS. But if we look at our top 37 schools in the district, about half of them are charter schools. So you can sort of see that play out. What if those top performing schools end up exiting, going over here, and then you end up in a situation of not enough students to sustain that overhead in the central office? I think you end up in probably a place that any business would not want to be in.
Sure. Well, let's move on from education. I know you love talking about education.
Yeah. I
Well,
bet your listeners love it too. Kind of like, get in there, Alice, and tell them it's possible, and don't take no for an answer.
the last time we talked, the way that you framed well, before we move on, because I'm now remembering this. The last
Yeah.
time you talked, the way that you framed third grade reading laws,
Mhm.
retention laws, or having a student read by the time they're in third grade was very the way was very fresh when you told it to me.
Mhm.
So what let's talk about the importance of having a child read by first grade and why that is absolutely necessary to make sure that they know how to read by the crucial point is third grade, right?
Yeah, yeah. The crucial point really is third grade, because in third grade you're shifting from learning to read and how to read to using the knowledge of knowing how to read in order to learn other subjects, right? So think about social studies curricula, geography, science, and any of these subjects that we start to introduce more of in fourth, fifth, sixth grade. If we're not a fluent reader, then we're struggling to understand what those concepts are, right? So the thrust of early education is really around literacy, because I was meeting a couple weeks ago with Chairman Scott Sapicki, and when I think about how you get things done with the state, that is an individual who knows how to get things done. He is one of the senior folks in education. And we were talking about the state of schools, and he said, look, Alice, some people right now think that this third grade retention law is kind of a blunt force instrument, right, to get attention of everyone. And I know a lot of people are upset about it, right? But we in government, frankly, are not really good at doing something unless it is made, the attention is there. And so this third grade law, a lot of it, I think, comes from too. He said that in our state prisons, we give literacy tests to inmates as they're in processing, and our male inmates are reading at a first grade level. Our female inmates are reading at a third grade level. So for every person who says, you're forcing someone to take an extra year of school, you're embarrassing the child, it's not going to work. If we don't intervene then to make sure our kids are reading and we're not passing them on and passing them over, like the likelihood is that 15 years later we're going to be testing that child and they had been passed all the way through the school system that didn't serve them.
Hmm.
So the 7 or 10 or 15 or whatever the number is, thousands of dollars per student to have them repeat a grade and to try to get it right, to try in every way to get it right? Or are we going to kick that forward and in 15 years later be spending $35,000 a year incarcerating them? And I sort of think like that's pretty blunt, Alice. But at the same time, it's like what should, in government, we're not good at this idea of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Right.
The preventative act of teaching a child to read, of getting it right, of wrapping them around with the literacy support, of paying to do that in the early years, is, it is incredibly critical.
It's difficult to quantify. You couldn't fit it into a spreadsheet and accurately
Yeah.
compare it, maybe. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
There have been some studies done about the difference of a good teacher and a bad teacher on like the lifetime earnings of a class of students. And it is sort of an interesting concept. So, but I know, well, let's move on. Let's talk about other fun things, Davis.
all right. So, a common theme of this mayoral campaign has been residents, saying they feel left behind, and I think
Hmm.
that's expressed a lot of ways, whether it be development, tourism,
Hmm.
stadium deals, etc. What do you think people mean by being left behind?
Yeah, well, I think some of that is change is hard, period,
Hmm.
right? And I think that we will always have a sort of a certain nostalgia for, gosh, I love when I could just zip downtown and there was no traffic, right? But you can now, go and see, right, some world-class shows that we used to not recruit. We've got world-class restaurants, right? So I think there's always going to be a little bit of, sadness about how growth has happened. But I think, but I would say maybe bigger is some of the change, is probably a sense of imbalance now that I don't think people signed up for Nashville being an adult tourism destination. I don't think people living here thought of themselves as the center of this kind of drinking, I don't know, sort of culture down there. And so but in terms of otherwise, it's probably also a challenge for any city that's going through the sort of the growth that we are, is that more educated, higher skilled workers are coming and relocating here. They are happy to pay 2 and 3 times the value of a home that you did. And so your sort of sense of what was probably where you were in the community and sort of the world is now, I think, being a little bit reordered. And so it's when I say we are not preparing our kids for the maximum wage jobs coming here, there's this sense of like, all right, these other people are coming here. They're arriving and they're, better educated, higher paid jobs, for sort of pulling our city up in a lot of ways. So I want to encourage, I'm glad that you guys are here. I know a lot of people are fleeing difficult situations that you don't want our city to turn into. But I think for longtime residents that have been here a long time, there's a little bit of like hey, how come those things are not available to me?
Of course.
Yeah.
How do you balance those two? Because Nashville is obviously a growing city. It's in demand. People are coming to the area, broadly speaking, surrounding counties and Davidson County included. What's the criteria for judging whether this project is good for the future of the city versus this one? Like, what calculus would you apply to some of those decisions?
Oh, do you mean like specifically on economic development deals?
Yes.
Yeah. So I would say that, and I mean, I think I have said this in my work. I was an assistant commissioner in economic development in Governor Bill Haslam's first term, and actually worked on the top to bottom review and put together the plan that we looked at. And the concept in economic development is traded clusters. What traded cluster businesses, industries do you want to recruit to the region? Why does it matter? I would say, frankly, in that plan, I think did pretty well. The region has grown spectacularly. Right now, I would say the majority of businesses looking at Nashville or the Nashville region are doing it primarily for our favorable tax environment. They are probably they're probably making a bet on our labor environment, that they can either attract those workers to move here, or in some ways they could hire some. But, we have a pretty tight labor market. And so I think for the most part, there's a sense of build it and they will come. I actually do not, I actually do not believe, and when you look at sort of the split between state dollars and city dollars, I actually don't really see a big role for economic development incentives for the city of Nashville. I would see instead areas around job training or job retraining, a desire to recruit companies that are interested in reaching down into our schools and helping us from what I would think of sort of as a K to J, about how do we, particularly probably from 6th to 12th grade, help make sure that we're infusing the skills for the jobs of tomorrow that are coming here, and that we're bringing that through our curricula. And so I think a sense of civic mindedness, a sense of investment in the community. But I actually don't, I frankly, and I actually think, to be fair, I know people bat around Alliance Bernstein a lot because Jim Gingrich is in the race, but I believe him and I think the numbers play out that they actually haven't taken any city incentives. And I remember at the state, when I was there, we were really the 800-pound gorilla with respect to these larger economic development deals. And so I see it as sort of like, you guys quarterback it. We'd sure love for them to be here. We're going to be at the table. We're going to be a welcoming city. But I don't see incentive and economic incentive dollars coming out of my administration. I just don't really think that there's a need for it. And if you are actually stepping back from it, and Jim and I, a year ago, we had this conversation. At the end of the day, it's sort of like sprinkles what a city government is putting there. But those sprinkles are big dollars to us as a city, but they're not when you're looking at the balance sheet of and sort of the income statement of an Alliance Bernstein. They're moving here because of the tax environment. Like, I mean, like the difference in New York to Tennessee is 1,000 times any dollars we're going to get. And it's not actually part of them making a decision.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you think anyone's been misleading? Like, so there is this just great insecurity among some residents, I guess mostly old ones. It's weird. It seems like it's longtime residents and newer residents who want the city to be this like new, different thing than it is. Do you think any candidates have been misleading in their messaging in this regard and trying to tap into that kind of either being left behind or this desire to remake the city into a new and better city?
I don't know if there's any misleading. I would say that if you think that the city is going in the wrong direction, you shouldn't keep hiring the same people, right? Like fundamentally, if your whole statement is, I have lots of experience knowing how to run the city, I have lots of experience for lots of mayors writing Nashville economic development deals. I have lots of experience with those mayors giving public parkland away to developers. You might kind of be like, is that actually the experience I want? A, and B, if we think that we actually need a reset, do we need to think about somebody who's not beholden to all of those interests, right? Who's not going to be defending, well, 6 years ago, I passed this legislation or I introduced this program, right? I actually, I don't think you can have it both ways. I don't think you can say you have a lot of experience in city government and yet not take responsibility for where we are. So I think that's a part that, but I may be missing your question. So maybe saying
that was you addressed it directly.
Okay.
I was hoping.
I am, Davis. I know that I'm always I'm like the boring numbers person. I'm always sort of like sitting over here thinking like, okay, they said this. How am I going to pay for it? Like, what am I going to work on? What's going to happen? But I do want you to know this week.
That's job though.
I know, but this weekend, I want you to know, Casey on my campaign team and Marvin, they were in here yesterday because it was raining, so we weren't knocking on doors. Everybody was here. We were sending out mailers and stuff. And I was like, hey guys, on Saturday night, we're going to go to a poetry open mic night for all of the mayoral candidates in Wedgwood, Houston. And Marvin's like, what are you going to read? So I go upstairs. I'm a published poet. I went through like 4 different Stanford University Press magazines. So I just want to say I'm also going to do fun stuff too. I can be fun. I know my roommate in business school, she'd always be like, Alice, I'm getting an A in networking. You're getting an A in everything else. I'm like, I'm going to be good at this weekend. I'm also going to Ray Stevens Cabaret. He wants us to come by and, we're going to be in Hermitage too. We're just doing all the fun stuff too.
I've not made it to Cabaret yet. I mean, I'm glad you reminded me of
You
that.
want to come? You can come with me on Saturday.
Yeah.
Okay. You got to live your best life. You got to show up when called. If Ray Stevens is going to sing Everything is Beautiful, I'm down. It's going to be great. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, back to the poetry real fast. Who's your favorite poet? Pick one.
Probably Robert Pinsky.
Oh yeah. I know Robert Pinsky.
Yeah. I love Robert. I also love Mary Oliver. She is so good at all her poetry around the natural world and the outdoors. So
I bought when I lived you went to Stanford. I lived in Palo Alto briefly after college working. And I remember I bought a book of Robert Pinsky poems.
Yeah.
The whatever bookstore down on University Avenue. I think it was that used bookstore right there by the furniture store. I don't know if you've been there in a while, but that's funny you say that.
The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. He has this like beautiful, he always like infuses all of these different, history in his poems.
Yeah.
Too. I think he might have been, was he like the poet laureate at some point, the national poet laureate?
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, this is not good thing. Nobody's quizzed me on that for being the mayor. I've been asked all kinds of things, Davis. I'm not going to sleep with my bodyguard. I'm just going to go ahead and get that out there. It's not going to happen. Not going to happen.
It's funny. That was my next question, so we can move on.
Good. Okay, well, good. Check.
Kind of related,
check
actually.
That one off.
Because we were going to talk about one thing you brought up consistently is how understaffed MNPD is.
Yep.
And I would like for you to lay out how you're going to address that, because it seems you said it's a recruiting problem, which is obviously such a case. And I don't hear a lot of people. You mentioned it earlier when you were talking about general metro positions as well. Yep. You don't hear people talk about recruiting for government jobs that much. Mm-hmm. It seems like I don't know. I don't hear people talking about making government jobs appealing to people. Mm-hmm. I think in particular, conservatives or Republicans have this like kind of aversion to working for the government, which I think is probably self-defeating in a lot of ways.
Oh yeah, no. And the beautiful thing is I was at the graduation of the 100th Police Academy class, maybe a month ago. And I met, there was a family that the father, the uncle, the son was graduating. It's not really dissimilar to my husband was in the military and went to West Point, and his West Point group. There are families who serve for generation. One of his classmates is E.G. Fishburne and like the Fishburne Military Academy in Virginia. And it's just sort of like running joke with their class of how many Fishburne nephews are going and nieces are going to West Point. And so I see that with our police force too here. But in terms of recognizing, so one, I would say that the current mayor has done a very good job of prioritizing recruiting more officers. We would be in a much worse place had he not. But staffing wise, our current force strength is based on 1.96 officers per 1,000. And I would posit, and the empty positions are based on that force strength, but I would posit that we actually need to be closer to 2.3 officers per 1,000. That's clearer to a national average, but it also, and then one could say later, hey, once you get to that point, you maybe need to go north from there too, because of the number of tourists that we have, and then the number of everyday commuters that we have, right? When you call 911, we don't ask, are you a Davidson County resident? Mm-hmm. When you call 911, we show up. But right now, people across the county are seeing, longer response times. Now, absolutely, the response in the Covenant shooting, the response in any really like what I would call sort of tier 1 trauma situation, we are able to do that. I'm not, people shouldn't go home and say, but if your car gets broken into, if you're recording a crime, if you're seeing somebody walking through your backyard, you're not in imminent danger, those calls, and you hear people talk about it, are, sometimes not answered. Somebody comes an hour and a half later, somebody comes 2 hours later. I mean, if it's outside of what we consider sort of like tier 1 trauma response calls, we're seeing longer response times. In terms of how are you going to staff that or change that, I think it is saying, we want to have the best urban police force in America, and we want you to be here, and we want to support you. I think that the reconstituted Citizens Advisory Board will continue to have transparency, but will help adjudicate some of these review cases more expediently. It's not helpful when the current formulation of this sort of bureaucracy that we built a bureaucracy around a good idea. People were for that idea. Review, citizens' input, transparency, right? Like these are things that of course we need to have. But the bureaucracy and the sort of activist thing that we built around it has resulted in cases, sometimes taking 2 years. Well, how is that creating a tight feedback loop for officers, for the department, of how to be responsive to citizens if it's taking 2 years to hear a case, right? I mean, like that's the antithesis of, I feel like when I come on your show, I want to use bigger words because you said panoply before we started. So I'm like, oh, Davis, he's so smart. I'm going to
Go, you're a published poet. You should know.
I'm going to jam it out. But no, it's, but having these, having a citizens advisory board that is responsive. Look, our Metro Police is really a lot of ways the envy of the nation for how quickly our body-worn footage goes out. Mm-hmm. It goes out incredibly fast, right? You see things like different crimes that happened a month ago that they're just now, and once there's a long lag time, it starts to make people feel like, what are they hiding? What's wrong, right? So in terms of doing that, it's pay, which I think we've addressed for the most part. Our officers are now the highest paid. But you mentioned about government being responsive, government being a place that we want to work. I also think government has to think about how, and probably less so in policing because the amount of training we put into police. But I love what Sheriff Darren Hall is doing right now to help fill some of his positions. Instead of thinking of the position as it must be a full-time job, of 40 hours a week, what he has done and he has found success in is taking some of the jobs and dividing them up into hourly jobs, where some people, moms or others, retirees, they want a job that's like 20 hours a week, right? And so what he's found is that because it is no longer, he's getting the same result, but he's not having to carry the full-time costs with benefits and long-term pension and other obligations. He's actually able to pay more, significantly more on an hourly basis, recruit better people, and have more flexible staffing. And so I think those are some of the things that we've got to look at across city government. If we can't explain what we're doing in terms of like an output to the citizens, number of people processed, number of permits met, and explain it on a day rate or on a unit rate, and when we start to be able to do that, then we can start to staff and sort of step back and say, does it have to be a full-time job, or are there periods where maybe there's specific periods in a year where we end up finding a big backlog in permitting or something else? Can we create a flexible part-time staff? Can we pay people more on an hourly basis? Can we attract a different kind of a work force? And I love, like, Sheriff Hall's doing that, and so I'm a big fan of saying, hey, if he's able to make that work, what can we learn from that in other departments, and how can we bring that kind of thinking there?
Sure. Well, okay. So bigger question about what about your platform do you think is most resonating with voters?
I would say probably the just this sense of optimism that we can actually get along with the state, and that we need to do that. And I know that is very distinct. I frequently remind people the tallest point in the county is named for my great-grandfather. It's Ganya Ridge at Radnor Lake. And most people who live around Radnor Lake, they don't care that that's a state park. They care that they have a park, right? And I know that there's this, little thing, Alice, that's a time we can never get back to. Why not? Why can't we get back there? Look, when we go to the General Assembly or with our neighbors and say, this is a problem for us, we need to come up with a solution. And it's probably not just a problem for us in Nashville. So a couple of examples, obviously the state, with no additional tax to residents, created during the Haslam administration the Tennessee Promise, right? Paying for 2 years of free community college for everyone, including people who live in Davidson County. That's good. Let's think of other things like that. This governor's budget is paying for diapers for 20,000 babies that live in Davidson County, that otherwise on TennCare, we saw really high rates of diaper rash cost and urinary tract infections. We saw families making difficult decisions. Let's figure out how to solve that problem. Same with mental health. And I mentioned Chairman Sapicki before. In this next legislative session, it is his intent to introduce legislation to build 33 state-funded residential mental health treatment centers modeled after one that's in Murray County, the county that he represents, Columbia, Tennessee, 2 counties south of here. And he says, like, look, Alice, in the entire state, we only have 500 residential mental health beds funded by the state of a 7 million population. We know we don't have enough beds. We know that some people experiencing homelessness need a mental health residential treatment facility. They don't need, some of the things that we're throwing at them, right? We need more beds. The state has a lot of money. It will cost about $1.4 billion. And we in Davidson County will get 3 of those because we've got 3 state Senate districts. That's about 500 beds. And that will contribute to getting, we know from Judge Melissa Blackburn and the criminal justice system broadly, that there's about 250 people in Davidson County that are chronically homeless, have mental health issues, that can't be prosecuted when they commit crimes because of their mental state. Let's fix that problem. That'll get us about, that'll go a long way to fixing that. So when I say, I think I just bring a really different approach to saying, hey, let's stop thinking about what we don't get along on and start thinking about what's a problem that we have, that other counties have that problem too. And let's lead. We're Nashville. We have, just like we were talking about, we've got a lot of really smart people here. We've got a lot of people who want to be here. Let's not act like we're better than everyone else. Let's act like we share a lot of problems that other people in the state do too. Let's figure out how we can work on them.
Yeah. Are there any voters in town you think you're reaching that other candidates are specifically not reaching?
Well, yeah, I would say I'm definitely reaching Republicans and conservatives in a different way, right? There are, I think the endorsement of the community leaders has gone a long way in that. Of the 8 candidates, if people are looking in the scene, I think I'm the only one. I was doing a talk yesterday, and an individual who lives in Forest Hills, he came up to me afterwards and he said, wow, you are really different. Because I was, unabashedly being responsible for outcomes in the city, and saying, and really not taking the position of, and actually I have Democrats on my website. A lady, the current general counsel in economic and community development, is a Democrat. This week she hosted a coffee for, people in Green Hills. And she always says, like, I'm one of your Democrat friends that is supporting you because it is just so refreshing. I actually believe you're going to bring the peace.
I've heard that from surprising people as well.
Yeah. So Davis, I know everybody runs around and says you can't win. You're a Republican, and I'm like, well, and Alice, it's a nonpartisan election. What are you doing? And I'm like, I'm really the last one to politicize it. Like, hey, who said that? Like, if you say it's nonpartisan, you're basically saying it's nonpartisan as long as you're a Democrat. I don't really like. Why is that? Our federal framing legislation today was passed in 2015 by Lamar Alexander. He was a United States Senator, a Republican from Tennessee. It was signed by President Barack Obama, a Democrat from Illinois, and that passed 85-12. His opioid legislation a couple of years later passed 99-1. This is not I'm not some I have Mike Sparks, who I was on his radio show, a very conservative member of the legislature in Smyrna. And he's like, Alice, this is going to be great, because when you were at the state, you would come up with this is how we're going to fix the problem. We're going to, and y'all are going to all go fight about all these other issues, but we're just going to fix the problem. So I think there's a little bit of people saying well, when she says she's not going to use City Hall as a backdrop for competing with the mayor of Portland and the mayor of Chicago for who can outdo each other, I'm not going to do that. I'm not in their club. I'm not competing with them. I'm in the club of trying to say, can I get my kids to read more and faster than your kids? That's the team that I'm cheering for. Can I get us off of the truth and accounting sinkhole city list? I'd like to do that.
Yeah.
And actually, I think a lot of us need to want to do that. And I don't think that those are, I think coming up with clear metrics on, that every person in city government can say, I know what my job is, and I can explain it to you, not as a policy and a procedure, but I can say, this is how I serve the public. My job is to, when I receive a request for a permit for something, is to review it. And if it's in a basic category, to return it within 6 hours. If it's in a complicated category, to return it within 3 days. But to start to say, and then how are we doing against those metrics? And how is my job serving the public, and not explaining departments to people, explaining how we can't do things? How do we get it? How do we get it a little bit more focused, a little bit more customer focused?
Local politics is interesting to me for a reason that I'm about to bring up. So potholes is just a persistent theme through every single forum. Potholes.
Yeah.
It's every one of us interacts with potholes, and you
Yeah.
marry that to how to allocate money, how to get kids to read, how to set them up
Mhm.
for success. So it's kind of this funny just range of
Yeah.
issues, but people are just always talking about potholes. You're gonna
Because, well, and here's why, Davis, you can rent your home, you can own your home, you can have kids in schools, you can have no kids in schools. But 98% of people, maybe 99, I don't know, let some smart person listening come up with a number, are interacting with our roads.
Yeah.
Right. And so, I mean, like, and Rogers Anderson, who's the mayor down in Williamson County, I really, really respect him. Yeah, early in the campaign, he's like, don't worry about all these other things that people are talking about. Well, think about what do more than 90% of the citizens deal with?
yeah.
Paying taxes, dealing with your roads. What if 80% or more deal with, hiring people, making sure that we've got an educated workforce, making sure their own kids are going to school, right? And start to draw the line. If it doesn't impact more than probably 70% of your citizens, or you're not hearing from, that group. And that's not to say to like ignore some things, but government, when I helped Senator Alexander with his last campaign, I mean, people walk in with all these crazy ideas of things that they think government should do, right? Like this one guy thought that we should invest in his like nuclear energy thing. And I was sitting there thinking like, this is a campaign. It's over in like 18 months. Nuclear energy permitting is like, like 20 years long. I mean, yeah. So I think it's being really clear eyed on like, what is the job? And I think entrepreneurs, which I know you have a lot of on your show that listen, is that really success in business is also making a list of things to not do.
Yes.
And I think that when we start to entertain, and it's not to say that those things aren't important, but it's also to say if we can find them in the phone book or they're better managed by a nonprofit or an issue advocacy group, that's probably where they should live.
Yeah. Yeah. As far as it's also, you're brought, and I'm brought 1,000 ideas every day. The power to say no, you got to prioritize. It's one of the more difficult tasks, I think, in running
Yeah.
any kind of organization of any size.
Yeah.
Well, Alice, it was great talking to you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah,
Well,
you should send us some of your poetry. We'll publish it.
No, Davis, you're going to come on Saturday night. We're going to go to.
I can't go this Saturday night.
Okay, well, you're gonna. I'm sure someone will cover it on Twitter. I'm sure they'll. I'm sure you can follow along there. Well, thank you for what you do for for helping to educate people about local issues. It is appreciated. This election you should think more about just the managing of the city, and less about somebody's letter next to their name. But I appreciate all votes, and we'll go with Ted Lasso. I believe we can love Nashville and love Tennessee, and doing both is a way that we can win for all of our residents.
Well, great, Alice. It was great talking to you. If you guys, Alice has got a website. What is it? AliceRaleigh4Mayor.com.
AliceRowley.com. Just
AliceRaleigh.com.
Yeah.
I'll put that in the show notes. This will go up on YouTube and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to kick you down, tell everyone to leave. And yeah, great talking to you. We'll
Thank
talk.
you.
All right. Bye. All right. Well, that's our show for today. We're going to start trimming these things down. It's just going to be one interview. Usually I'd bring up Megan and Jared and we go through a whole spiel on a variety of other topics. We're going to start trimming it down. These things are going to be shorter and more concentrated. This is the first example of that. So we appreciate having Alice on the show. And as we mentioned, we endorsed Alice as our chosen candidate. So we are supporting her in the mayor's race going forward. So if you get out, go vote for Alice. That's all I got for today. Appreciate everyone. We'll see you next week.